Hello, and welcome to Team Ludo's final project presentation and post-mortem of our game Flashlight. My name is Dino, and I'll be going over the initial design concepts and implementations that led to the game to the state of the way it is now. Our initial concept was to design a game for a younger audience that was Scooby-Doo meets Monster House meets Maniac Mansion with a little bit of the art style from Tim Schafer's Psychonauts. Our initial concept also for our interior and or levels was similar to what you see in the screenshot for the house interior on our concept art. It was supposed to be comprised of 5 levels and or sections and contain a museum-like, castle-like gothic interior that would be creepy to any younger child moving around in a dark house with a flashlight. Our initial concepts for our minor enemies were rats, cockroaches, and spiders, figuring that, young kids are scared of bugs, and that would play into our design of a non-lethal game where the player really doesn't kill anything but sort of shoos it away in the opposite direction, or for better words, scares it away. Our initial concepts for our bosses was to have 2 boss battles within the game, one kind of a mini boss battle, and then the final boss battle, which is represented by these character concept arts here. We were also supposed to have a Scooby-Doo style ending where the villain was unmasked and was revealed to be no more than a grumpy old man who didn't like kids, exactly like Scooby-Doo. Next is our concept for our flashlights. Since we sort of decided this game kind of takes place in the late 50s to mid 60s, for our art concepts at least, we were looking to go retro and old school, so I was able to dig up a bunch of old 30s, 40s, and 50s eras flashlight images. However, due to circumstances beyond our control, the art assets were never implemented and or created for our game. Moving on, these are the initial character concepts for our NPC characters that the player rescues and for the player avatar itself. Initially, when we started doing our design and everything coming from these basic shots, we decided to build a room and started to see what could be implemented and what could be worked in terms of traps, interiors, in terms of setting and lighting to create an ideal environment for the player. And that's pretty much it on the prototyping and early stages of design. I will now be turning the floor over to the rest of my team members who will tell you more about the technical aspects of our game and the trials and tribulations that had to be overcome and hurdled, so to speak, in getting this game made.
Hey guys, I'm Tom and Fandy. So our month in Final Project 1 was basically spent mainly focusing on our vertical slice assignment, which was basically a room that we created to showcase some of our initial design concepts and systems. As the player runs through the room, they basically encounter enemies and other sort of platforms and traps along the way to getting to the final boss of the room, where the player encounters the puzzle and kills the boss to release their friend. One of the main things we wanted to focus on for our VS was getting the feel of the horror aspect of the game, and to do so we added these Kismet spiders that basically run along the wall to add a little more of a horror vibe to the game. And we also added platforms and other moving objects along the way through the level. Here you can see the basic block puzzle that was designed to have the player touch the blocks and then they come together, which kills the boss and releases your friend. Here's some of the Kismet on how that boss puzzle was put together. It's mainly just touch triggers linked up to matinees, which cause the items to move. And then it causes an animation for the boss to explode and allows your friend to escape. And that was the end of our VS.
Hi, my name is Christopher Hermosillo, and I'm the project lead of Team Ludo, as well as a lead level designer. I will be covering our work in Final Project 2 for months 2 and 3 of our production cycle, mainly the level design aspect. At the beginning of Final Project 2, the layout of the vertical slice was pretty well established. The first level's architecture was constructed, and we were adding platforming elements, pacing the AI. We began the design and creation of levels 3 and 4, and the designing of the boss encounters. We quickly finished levels 3 and 4, getting the main architecture of the level done, and adding the spaces for the designed encounters. The challenge with these new levels is they needed to be more difficult than our current levels. One major problem, though, was we only had platforming elements to make the game more challenging at this point, because we couldn't get an interp actor to cause damage to the player to make an environmental trap. However, the construction went on, and the presence of platforming elements continued to get heavier, overpowering the other elements. By the end of the first month of Final Project 2, we had finished adding transition segments that offered a side-scrolling encounter to the game from level to level. In levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, we completed the main structure, added unique cameras to give the presence of someone watching you, some AI placement, platforming encounters, and some fear encounters. But the level still lacks some major elements, like fully textured DSP, and the boss sequences still were not designed. There were also a lot of balancing issues at this time, since we were finishing the levels later on in the week, and little testing of the EXE where the levels were conducted. But the biggest thing we noticed was a shift in the nature of our game. At first, we thought of the game as an action puzzler with some platforming elements, but our level designs so far tended to favor the platforming elements, and the puzzles were just not there. Also, most AI encounters needed to be placed and integrated with trap encounters to keep the action pacing. We concluded that with the gameplay elements we had, the game was more of a survival platformer, and this helped out level design in the second installment of Final Project 2.
In our second month of Final Project 2, we had levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 created at about 75% completion. During this phase, we cut some things from the game. We got rid of the side-scrolling element, which didn't fit the rest of the gameplay, boss encounters, which proved to be too much work for the time allowed. In the original level 1 we constructed, which developed from earlier in the production cycle, when we had another vision of the game. The rework of level 1 did to showcase the game's major elements, introducing the AI, the concept of platform jumping and moving platforms, fear encounters, and the safety your flashlight provides you. The first level concept view was a bedroom. This allowed us to use individual rooms to showcase each encounter. All the levels benefited from this new insight we had into our game, from breaking its components down and creating the tutorial level. We also focused on getting level 5 into the game and fleshing it out, and adding interactive AI encounters into the game, rather than just placing them in the level. We also developed sound with feedback of the player's actions, and this really brought life into the game. It came with its fair share of bugs. At the end of Final Project 2, we had levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 constructed, and the majority of the gameplay elements added. However, we were starting to feel overwhelmed by the scope of the project, and knew we had to eliminate some things.
So Final Project 3 was a month of big change for us. I'm going to go ahead and let Chris Diaz tell you guys about the HUD and script changes that went into Flashlight.
Hi, my name is Chris Diaz. I'll be taking you through some of the Unreal scripting and Flash scripting we did for Flashlight. Flashlight is kind of a different game in that there's no direct way to kill enemies outside of what the player can do with their flashlight. As a result, the flashlight and the enemies that are affected by the flashlight become a very important part of the game. Allowing the player to see enemies in the dark environments we created was also important. The original design for Flashlight called for a first-person perspective, but we decided to switch to a third-person perspective as we wanted to give the player a wider field of vision, and it proved to be easier on the player for some of the platforming elements in the game. The camera and the flashlight are really the two main components for players exploring the world. Coding the flashlight itself was a challenge. You can't put collision on light particles and you decay. The solution I came up with was to project a collision volume at the end of a ray trace emanating from the flashlight. The next step was to have our AI react to the collision volume. We wanted to have at least 3 different enemies in the game. We differentiated the enemies by how they reacted to the flashlight. We wanted the roaches to act like real roaches and run away from the flashlight. They'd come back and attack the player. I also made the collision volumes on the roaches smaller than the other enemies, which had the side effect of making the roaches jump more often. The jumping really gives the roaches a great behavior. Spiders are more aggressive in how they attack the player after they have been scared by the light. They jump less often as well. The rats were different from the other two enemies in that they go towards a custom actor placed in the level by the level designers when they're scared. They jump in random intervals and they're the hardest to hurt with the light. The only way to kill enemies is by hurting them into traps or into holes. Our traps are created by custom interrupt actors in the levels. We also wanted to have interrupt actors that damage the player. We actually started with interrupt actors that damage both the players and the enemies, but breaking these up into two types allowed for a more flexible level design. The majority of this work was done in Unreal Script. In all, we ended up with 19 scripts. Some just declare custom actors for use in our game, while others have complex AI behaviors. I don't think we could have gotten some of these things done without Unreal Script. I was really overburdened at the beginning of the project as I was the only Unreal Scripter. Once I completed the major functionality, it just became a matter of tweaking what we had. The UI for Flashlight is minimalistic. I used Flash and Scaleform for all of our UI. We wanted to provide basic functionality and hints on how to play the game. At the same time, we wanted the gameplay to be the focal point. I used Scaleform to create the HUD. As you can see in the game, when the player uses a stun power, the flashlight changes color, the button goes into a press state, and the stun effect changes the light in the game. All these sync up time-wise. To accomplish this, I use the interval function in Flash and the timer function in Unreal Script. The menu lets the player start a new game, play the game, view the credits, and exit the game. The only issue we had with the menu was that some of the commands that we were using in the game were only available in PC mode, not when playing from the editor. This took some research to find out. The other SWFs in the game were pretty straightforward, and I had the time to add some animations like a fade in for the tutorial text and a fly in for the congratulations at the end. We used a combination of Flash and Unreal Script to implement these movies.
So Final Project 3 was an era of big change in our project. We basically changed a lot of the AI, a lot of the level design, and a lot of the features. We also ended up cutting like half or more of the levels we had initially intended and streamlined it down to just 3 levels to concentrate on making those 3 levels more fun and more playable. Some of the things we added in this last month were a lot of text tutorials and some SWF movies to the walls in order to ensure that the player knew exactly what they were supposed to do at all times. This was one of the biggest complaints we had gotten on feedback on our game, was the player was confused as to what to do. So we really spent a lot of time and thought a lot about how we could show the player what to do. Another thing that we did was add these red icons to show that items or things in the environment can be interacted with. And this basically was a visual key to let the player know that, hey, when you see this, you should be able to interact with it. Also, I added another final puzzle in the last level to release another one of your friends that has been held captive. This basically was to show that the 2 friends that had initially been entered the house with you had gotten lost per our story, and this is the second one that you save, and it tells you as it's exiting the cage that it's in to that thank you for saving me, and now it's time to get up to the final window where you finally leave and exit the game. Overall, this project as a whole was really tough. I think the smartest move that we did during this project was in this last month to streamline everything down, and that is probably the biggest piece of advice that I could give anyone, is to definitely try to focus your gameplay and focus everything and make it fun in a smaller level situation instead of trying to cram more levels in there that just aren't fun, which is one of the big issues that we did have. So that's pretty much it for our game Flashlight. We hope you guys all enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.